Hello and welcome to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you are new around here, welcome, welcome. If you are a return listener, welcome back, my friends. We do have a guest episode today, a return guest. The lovely Grace Tempany is coming to hang out with us, and we are going to talk about Yin Yoga teacher trainings. We'll get to that in Anne Grace's bio in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to read a little bit of podcast love that I recently received. Now, I'm hoping that I'm saying his name right. I did ask him how to pronounce it, but it's in text, not audio, and he's Scottish. So I certainly will not be able to say this with a enchanting Scottish accent, but I believe it's pronounced Morag. So this is some feedback that I received from Morag. I wanted to say thank you for your fabulous podcast. So here is what Morag had to say about the podcast. Hello, Nick. I wanted to say thank you for your fabulous podcast. As a recently qualified 58-year-old Yin Yoga teacher, you have provided me with so much wisdom, and you share your knowledge so generously and professionally. This Friday in my Yin class, I cautiously introduced your metta loving kindness thoughts, well aware that I've barely touched the surface of knowledge in this area. I followed your guidance from the podcast, and I could feel the energy shift in the room. It just worked. And afterward, a few people came up and told me how much they enjoyed the class and how relaxed they felt. Thank you for giving me the confidence to teach this in class. And every subject in your podcast is a question in my head. Thank you. Morag Swanson from Edinburgh. Thank you, Morag. I love getting your feedback, y'all. And you could do that if you have been here before in a multitude of ways. You could rate the podcast, give it 5 stars on Apple or Spotify. On Apple, you can also leave a written review. On Spotify, you can leave a comment. So if there's an episode that you particularly found helpful, you can just let me know in the comments. Also, if you are watching or listening on my blog, so on my website, which is the link I usually share around, there's a comment section there. So I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you're watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comments any feedback about this episode or about the podcast. Any little bit of kind of boost that we can get for the podcast, it being still fairly new, is super helpful. So if you have not already and you've been loving the podcast, I would love it if you would take a moment to rate it or review it, or leave me some comments either on Spotify below or here on YouTube. All right, my friends, let's get into today's guest. So today I have a return guest, the ever so lovely and fast becoming a good colleague and friend, Grace Tempany. So I'm going to quickly read her bio on her website. Grace Tempany didn't intentionally set out in life to be a reformer, but it turns out that when you combine vision and conviction with a desire to get straight to the heart of the matter, the result, a trailblazing pioneer, albeit a reluctant one much of the time. I can relate. After an initial career in education, French, and music, Grace set off in 2013 to train as a yoga teacher in Los Angeles. There followed a 3-year stint in the Southern Hemisphere, which she taught full-time Bikram yoga in studios in Australia, New Zealand, and South Asia. In Auckland in 2014, Grace experienced her first Yin class, and for the second time in her life, encountered a practice she knew she would practice and teach forever. On her return to Dublin in 2016, Grace knew there was something very different about the way she was teaching Yin. For a long time, she put that down to a lack of training and set about remedying that by creating her own. And it took much longer time for her to realize that there was something fundamentally different in the way she was sharing the practice with people. Only more recently did the penny drop behind that Yin with Grace was the Grace Tempany method, a methodology, my apologies, that has been refined and distilled over the years, whose efficacy, words today, continue to surprise her. They say the unconscious always surprises, and maybe that's exactly what Yin and its capacity to reveal and unveil has shown. Never one to rest on her laurels for too long, Grace embarked on a psychotherapy training in 2022, rerouting into psychoanalysis in 2024. Alongside her career and education and teacher training, Grace is a proponent of talk therapy as a client and a therapist in training. A reformer here too, her intuition always guides her to find solutions around the fringes, creating an intersection points between worlds where she has found a particular talents to put to use for the collective. Grace has married expertise with experience, both vast, and trusts that her wisdom, the wisdom that emerges when both feelings and thinking align, bridging the gap between talk therapy and body-orientated treatments, are where her latest endeavors are taking her. Now, Grace has been on the show before. The episode is called How to Hold Brave Space. So I believe it was season 1, episode 11, How to Hold Brave Space with Grace Tempany. So we have chatted before, and the next time that you hear from me, I will be with Grace. Hi, Grace. Welcome back to a Yin Yoga podcast. I feel like very few people I can say are like a friend of the show, we could say, because you've been here before. So welcome back.
Thanks, Nick. Honored to be given that title today. Yeah, excited to see what's to come.
Yeah. So this episode came about. I mean, of course, I always meant to have you on probably repeatedly at some point, just because we've always had such good chats. But you and I were DMing in the Insta, and we were chatting a little, ranting a little frustrated about something. And I remember saying to you, oh, should we perhaps talk about this on the podcast instead of in the DMs? And so here we are. Here we are. So the topic that we're going to talk about today is, when are you ready to start training teachers in Yin? Because both you and I have had some interesting experiences with people starting to train teachers where we're like, wait, what? And so I thought this would be a really good one to break that down. When are we ready to start training teachers? So maybe we'll start with, if you don't mind, I will ask you that question, and then I'll answer the question of, when did you know you were ready to start training teachers? When did it hit you?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny, as you were actually saying that, as you were saying, when are you ready to train teachers? And in my mind, I'm going, and if you are someone who should ever, I suppose,
yes,
not to.
Let's break that down first.
Break that down first, because this notion, I think, and this is a really good point to begin on, actually. What is the natural progression of a Yin Yoga teacher? First of all, there's the process of encountering yoga of some kind, and then encountering Yin, and then deciding, you know what, I want to train, I want to become a Yin Yoga teacher. And it doesn't make sense to me that of all of those people who train to be Yin Yoga teachers, that there should be so many of them who naturally go on then to run trainings. It's just much too high a percentage of people who go from the teaching into the training. So that section, I think, needs to be looked at a little bit as well. Because for some, it's just that it's too early. It's like you say, it's too hasty. Like, it's happening far too early on the trajectory. And then I think there are probably as many others for whom the decision should never really be made at all, and is made for maybe all the wrong reasons. So that's something as well. But to go back to your question, for me, how did I know? I suppose I knew because of, I guess, a pathway that took me from teaching into yoga first. I guess I'm an unusual enough case in that I was a classroom teacher and was a trainer of newly qualified teachers in a different setting before I came to yoga. So I had that.
So it was already that skill set and that gift. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, or the experience. I mean, I don't even want to put it down to a gift. Like, I mean, I have innate talents for sure, but it was mainly just that I had a lot of experience in that setting. So when I trained, my first training in Yin was 2015, and I was already teaching yoga for a couple of years at that time. When I first trained, I did 100 hours first, and then I trained with another teacher and then another teacher. And then I went back and I did a second 100 hour with my original teacher. And so it was 3.5 years into my, let's say, Yin training journey before I kind of started tentatively with a 3-day training, a 30-hour training.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to say that I always felt that I had something to offer in the teacher training sphere, but it was there prior, it was definitely, it was there
Yes.
prior to me doing a Yin training. But the real clincher was, and I recall, because when I encountered Yin, I was living in New Zealand, I was teaching over there. And so when I returned back to Ireland in 2016, and I went to try a couple of Yin classes here, and that was when I knew I would run teacher training, because I was like, what in sweet Jesus is this? Because it's not Yin as I was taught it. So I don't know who trained these people. That was my question. I'm like, where did these teachers learn? Because we've learned something so vastly different that I had to reconcile that. And then I realized afterwards, because I was very naive at the beginning, and I just thought, well, how could you possibly teach something you're not trained in? What I didn't realize is that these people were indeed teaching something they weren't trained in. And that was their element to it. So there you go, long-winded answer, but I hope that gives
No, I'm going to tease out a couple elements too, but I just realized that I forgot to do the adult language warning in the intro. So if you're listening, dear podcast lovers, these are adult conversations with adult subject matter and possibly adult language. Nick, as the soul of a mermaid in the mouth of a sailor, I won't speak for Grace, but swearing could happen.
Grace is Irish. That's enough.
So yeah, so grab some headphones if you have little ones around. Okay. So the interesting thing about what you just said to me is that you already had this teaching background. And so then you were literally just putting it into new subject matter. And I had a similar experience, not with school teachers, but I, much to my reluctance when I was a hairstylist, ended up becoming, I mean, I wasn't reluctant once it happened, just beforehand. People might laugh when they hear this, but I don't actually like to be the center of attention. And so being an educator, being on stage and doing like hair shows and platform, like never on my radar. I was like the quiet back of the class kid, the rebellious back of the class kid. So when I ended up having a career, which how that happened is a story for some other time, but I ended up getting thrown on stage. A mentor of mine saw something in me I did not see in myself. So learning to teach and also present was something I had years of experience in before I even became a yoga teacher. I remember one example very clearly of and I had a mentor who had a degree in adult learning styles. So if I ever came up with anything where I was like, how could I be getting this across more effectively? Or this is tripping me up, she was always there for questions. And I remember really clearly the very first time that I realized that teaching is something I should probably do forever. And it was a beginner hair color theory class where I could see as I was watching the faces of the students that there was one person in the group, she wasn't getting it. Like it just was like, she wasn't saying it because she was too shy to say, I'm confused, I'm lost. How are you all getting this? I don't understand. But she wasn't getting it. And I don't know what sparked it. I think it was kinesthetic. So I was like, all right, everybody, let's grab some Play-Doh. And so I grabbed some Play-Doh and we all took the different colors and then mixed them together with our hands and then looked at what we created. And all of a sudden you could see the light bulbs going off in her eyes. Like she was like, oh, I get it. And then afterwards she said to me, I hope you teach forever. You're a really good teacher. So that's what started it. But then when I decided to retire hair as my livelihood, then I became very conscious that I wanted to teach yoga because I knew I was already a teacher and I was spoiled by having always had a career I loved. And so when I was at that point in hair where I was like, I can't keep doing this. So what is my plan B? And what I was just sat down with a notebook and was like, what do I love to do? Well, I love coffee. I love reading books. No one's going to pay me to drink coffee and read books. Okay, scratch that off. And then it was just, I love yoga and I love teaching. It was like right there in paper as I was brainstorming. And I was like, okay. But that was just to become a yoga teacher. That wasn't to train teachers. So how I knew I was ready, I guess, to train teachers is sort of twofold. So I actually just was, so it was right at the time where I was going back and forth to visit Paul Grilly. And I think I was at about 300 hours at the time with Paul. And so I already had, a 500 in my previous yoga. I hate even talking in this Yoga Alliance speak, but I know it's the only language that most yoga teachers understand with these hundreds of hours. But so, I had 500 already, and then I was had just finished my 300 with Paul and was continuing to go back and forth in the summers as soon as I could afford to. And I had somebody come up and ask me to train them. I had a colleague or an associate say, do you offer yin trainings? And I said, no, I don't. She said, because I really want to branch into teaching yin, but I can't go to California to study with Paul, small children and such. But I really want to make sure that I'm learning from somebody who has got a lot of experience and training in this. And so I created my first apprenticeship. And actually will say I offer mentorship now with teachers. Most of them have taken my training already, and then we can continue on that, but I haven't done a lot of apprenticeship recently. But before I had a program, which I'll talk about a little bit about how that ended up happening. Before I had a program, I had apprentices. And so the great thing about that model was I was able to teach each of them individually.
Yeah.
So get an idea of where they were at and where the holes in their knowledge were. And that's what we would spend more time on. So for example, my very first apprentice was incredibly flexible and super able-bodied and did not have a knack for helping people with accessibility because they just had no lived experience of like, what do you mean you can't put your hand here? And so confidence at the front of the room wasn't an issue with this person. Former musician, fine, standing up in front of people. Knowledge of the yin, not a problem. This person had already done, I think, a little bit of training, or maybe they were about to go. I think they had already done 150 hours of yin training with Paul and Bernie when they started apprenticing. But what they really needed help with was trying to figure out intelligent sequences and then also learning to teach in a way that offered variations and accessibility. And so that's what we spent most of our time with. And then another person I apprenticed, their challenge was being comfortable at the front of the room. And that was most of it. They'd practiced a lot of yin. They actually were studying Chinese medicine, so they didn't need my help there at all. But what they really needed was just like the role of the teacher and sitting in the seat of the teacher and claiming that space and having the confidence and the experience to hold brave space and the confidence, but also the humility of the role of the teacher and what that means to be there. So the lovely thing about this apprenticeship model is I was able to tailor it to each individual where they really needed the support. Now, I will say about that model, it's not always as accessible financially as just like taking a training. And so that's why I think not as many people do it. So now what I tend to do more of, although I'm always open to apprenticeship if anybody wants it, is I tend to have people go through my training and then do ongoing mentorship afterwards so that I know this is their base of their information. And then it ends up being less time and also less financial commitment that way. Yeah. So I knew when people asked. And then even when I ran my program, so that was just apprenticeship for years. That's all I did. It's just one-on-one. As people asked, it wasn't on my website. It was just like, if people asked me, I'd be like, oh yeah, let's do this. And then when I finally came up with a course, was when I was in my yoga therapy training, which isn't that long ago, actually. So at that point, I had already done 400. And then while I was in my training, I finished my last to get 500 with Paul. Not my last. I plan to study with Paul as often as funds and time and his schedule allows, but my last in the past. And so that took me to my 500. And at the time in that yoga therapy program, there was somebody else teaching the yin component. Now, I hadn't experienced her training because I used applied credit to get out of it. Because, I mean, when you've got 400 hours with Paul Grilly, you don't need 20-hour module of yin, So I had used my applied credit to skip over that. And while everyone else was learning with that teacher in the program, the yoga therapy program, I was in California hanging out with Paul. But what was happening is, because it's an intimate group of yoga therapists, they all kind of get to know each other. And so they used to call me the queen of yin. And so what was happening is because things would randomly get said in a module that was nothing to do with yin about yin. And people would watch me as one eyebrow would go up. And then sure enough, the facilitators would be like, do you have something to add? I was like, oh, yes, I do. And then the students of the program would come to me with questions and I would just answer them. And then what happened eventually was I started getting emails from my fellow classmates with questions based on what they learned in their module. And I was shocked to find out what they were learning in their module, or more importantly, what they weren't learning in a therapeutic, like a yoga therapy program in yin. Yeah. It just became really clear. And I was getting more and more emails like this. And I would always answer the questions, but then I would say, have you reached out to the people who run the program? Like, have you given them this question? Have you given them this feedback? Because they're the ones who hired said person. So if there's issues coming up, when they were like, I know I didn't. And there was this feeling of like, ugh. So I reached out to them because I had just graduated for the program. And I just reached out and said, I don't even know how to say this. And this is incredibly awkward, but I'm getting a lot of emails about questions after the yin training. All kinds of things are being said to me that aren't accurate. Students getting injured. Why are you getting injured in a therapeutic yin module in your yoga therapy training? I do not know. And so I just said, this keeps coming up. So would you like me to just I don't know, do like a level 2 or something with them? So that afterwards, maybe I can clean up some of this mess, or maybe I could write like a little guidebook or just offer like a lecture or something. And then they just basically said, how'd you like to teach it? I was like, oh, okay. Yes, I will do that. Okay. And so that's how I created my first official, and that was small. So it was a 20-hour level 1. And then we added a level 2, which was a 30. And I was very clear to tell those students when I taught them, these little modules that we take in our yoga therapy program of a 20-hour or a 30-hour, even if you get the 50 from me, that's the start of your yin training. This is a little toe dip in the water of, I have a crush on yin. I want to take this relationship deeper. I'm going to see if maybe it's a good fit. How much do I want to commit to this yin business? That's what that is. I said, this qualifies you to, in my opinion, occasionally sub a class for another yin teacher. Yeah. If you really, after taking these, have oh my God, mad love affair with yin yoga forever, all the yin things, this is just a tiny little blip in your yin education journey.
It's funny going back to even the fact that in that yoga therapy module that I think the disrespect and ignorance around yin is very often at the teacher trainer level in, be it 200 hours, 300 hours, and even yoga therapy programs. Because it's interesting that it took for existing students to highlight the fact that, this person who you've employed is not trained to do this and does not have any of the knowledge and experience. And then it took that for them to kind of go, okay, well, we'll get someone else. But the point is that originally, when they were finding their faculty, they weren't scrupulous enough. And I wonder, this discernment piece, I often speak about it as lacking, really intensely lacking in the yoga world as a whole, and lacking in yoga education, because there is just the yin world, I suppose, is small. The functional yin world is smaller again. The Paul Grilly yin world is a small segment, should be much larger, but is a small segment of the yin world as a whole. And it really does seem there's so much education out there that needs to take place that doesn't. And it does make me wonder. I mean, I'm really glad they asked you to do like to take it over, but it does make me think about all of those courses where maybe the complaints don't come through, right? Or
The
maybe
problem was apparently, so this person who was running it, she did have yin training with Sarah Powers, at least a
okay,
couple hundred hours.
okay,
And she was also a Chinese medicine doctor,
okay,
but she was not a yoga therapist.
okay.
And now I think if you want to be an International Association of Yoga Therapist approved program, all your faculty does have to be. But I think at the time you could have people that were qualified in other areas. They I guess had been asking her, because she kept saying she was going to get her yoga therapy cert. Because at the time you could still, I think when she started, you could still grandfather in. And she kept saying she was going to, but then didn't and didn't and didn't. And what I didn't know until later, so I taught my first module with them, and I got an email from them afterwards going, "Oh my God, Nick, like the feedback that we just got from your training." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, glowing. Like, we have never gotten this kind of good feedback from our yin training. And I was like, I think with them, they were aware that this person is not ideal. But in this little island where I live, to try to find somebody who had as much or more yin training and was a yoga therapist do you know what I mean? There was like, this isn't working out perfectly, but like there's no one else. And so when they realized that, of course, I have all the Paul training and that, and I had their training, so it was like, and I was a, yoga therapist, it was like, okay, all of the boxes are checked here. And, I taught for them for a while, and then it just became clear that when COVID started, there was just some things that shifted that I was not comfortable with anymore. There was a few things about the program I wanted to shift, and I just was met with no, basically. And so I ended up leaving teaching from there. And then at the same time, though, I had already started creating my own training, because I really felt I'm not very good at working for other people, it turns out. Surprise, surprise. I felt pigeonholed by the hoops that they had to jump through. I kind of wanted to like slow it down and like stretch it out. And so what I ended up doing was just creating my own program where I could just do it as I wanted. And it started as a 50-hour. And then very quickly I was like, that's not enough. I need at least 60. And then just recently increased it to 100, because I was like, 60 hours, who am I kidding? It's not even close to enough.
Tell me, like, have you noticed in Canada that there are a lot of other trainings cropping up? People like
Yes.
get back to kind of
Yeah.
who can run in training, because obviously this is a very unregulated market. So
yeah, I would say a few in Canada. And I don't know for sure, because I think a lot of times what happens is, because although Canada is vast, meaning the country is massive, we are not heavily populated. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is people end up taking their trainings from Americans, because we're so close and time zones work and all that. So I would say there are probably many Canadians offering yin trainings that perhaps shouldn't be, in my opinion. And we can talk about maybe in a moment about like, when is someone ready? Because we already did the if they're ready. And I can share a couple examples. I'm sure you've got some. So I would say that there is some of that happening. Even at one of the studios that I teach at, there's a gal now. So I did teach a couple of yin modules there, and they were great. They were well received. But then they have somebody there who has done a lot of Chinese study. And I don't even want to say Chinese medicine, because it's a lot more like facial reading and kind of astrology. And so they've really dove deep in the Chinese rabbit hole. And so they're now doing the yin training there. But concern I have with this, and why many of the people that then graduate that program end up coming to my program, is that although she's got all this interesting to know Chinese information, she doesn't have a strong Yin Yoga training foundation, meaning she hasn't studied with Sarah or Paul, or maybe she studied with Bernie, I don't know, but she hasn't done many hundreds of hours of Yin training. And so it's her program tends to be more dominant in the sort of Chinese arts and that aspect, and less about fascia and functional alignment and that kind of stuff. I think I have a couple participants that took her program and were like, well, it's really great that I know this Chinese astrology. It's fun information, but like, it's not helping me teach my class. It's not helping me when someone's in front of me and I can't figure out why their body won't do what it is that my body does. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to help them. So I don't think there's I don't think there's as many in Canada. I could be wrong though. It could just be that I live in a bubble, that are, in my opinion, offering trainings too quickly. Whether or not they should ever, I don't know, because I don't know them, but definitely too quickly. But I definitely would say there's a ton in the States. Like, I mean, if you're in the Yin Yoga Network group, you see it all the time. Like on the days where trainings are posted, it's like, I don't know how many, like 20-hour, 30-hour, 20-hour, 30-hour, 20-hour, 30-hour courses you see in there.
Yeah, a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. And I just think, like, why would you even bother with a 20-hour?
I often wonder about the amount of training that the people running them have done. Like, I mean, I think there's two pieces to this that I can speak to from what I see in Ireland, and I'm going to say Europe, but Ireland is what I know most.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the scene that I would be very aware of for just, it's being in it for so long. But there's the fact that there might be someone, right, who does a yin training with one teacher who does a 50-hour yin training. And then that person can, some years later, decide to run a 100-hour yin training. So my question is, how can a person who's only actually done 50 hours of yin training run a 100-hour yin training? So that's one aspect. I think it's very strange that you would run a longer training than the training you took.
That is very strange.
That is very strange, and that is very common.
Wow.
And the second thing that I see a lot of is this passing from being the student one year to running the training the following year. And when I say being the student, I mean being the student of that particular training. And I know in many cases that the people running those trainings aren't actually trained in yin themselves. So you have this kind of really crazy knock-on effect where you have trainings run by people not trained in yin, training people who then 12 months later are running the same training.
Oh my Lord.
I actually feel like I need to have air quotes, air quotes for the word training, because it is absolutely the furthest thing from it. And then in the midst of all that, you have, I had a very interesting discovery call just some weeks back with the student who I'd say had just kind of found me online or looked up yin trainings in Dublin. And she had quite naively and innocently just asked the question. She says, oh, I'm looking at this 50-hour yin training and it's in this studio, in Dublin. And she said, and yours is 100 hours. And I'm just like, why would I do 100 hours when I could do 50? So I was like, where do we...
I think the opposite. Why would you do 50 when you could do 100?
I know, but that was the least of her worries, really. The fact that she was actually contemplating going to do a 50-hour training with somebody who wasn't trained in yin. And I had to watch what I was saying, not name any names, speak around the topic.
Yes, that's the hard part.
Explain to this girl that the choice was not between a 50-hour yin training and a 100-hour yin training. It was between going to somebody who knows what they're doing and somebody who doesn't.
And this is where I think the hard part for us as yoga educators and teachers can be, is to be able to clearly state these things without sounding like we're just trying to prop up our program. Do you know what I mean? It's so hard as an educator to find the line between calling out the bullshit when you see it, you know? And I often just say to people, like, whether you take mine or somebody else's, if you need recommendations other than me, please let me know. I can hook you up with some, you know? It's like, how do we feel confident and comfortable calling out the bullshit without feeling that people are going to think we're just saying that because we want to fill our training? Because I'm not saying that because I want to fill my trainings, because my trainings feel just fine.
Yeah, I know.
But it frustrates me because because we are in an unregulated industry, and I feel like the bar in yoga in general is so low as far as
it's so low. Yeah.
Education, expectations, professionalism. And I'm not saying, when I say professionalism, I'm not talking about like being stuffy and being on LinkedIn and corporate stuff. I'm just talking about, you know, integrity. To me, yes, integrity and humility. Like when you said that, you know, you have people that are taking a 50-hour training and then are teaching 100. I don't even understand how, if you've taken a 50-hour training, how you can lead a 50-hour training unless you're literally just stealing all the material from your 50-hour training.
Which a lot of people do, Nick. I know of two examples of that as well. I think there is no end to what people will consider doing when the question is why teacher training actually comes into the fold at all. And I think we're going to maybe touch on this a little bit now, which is that people see it as a natural progression in order to financially develop their careers. Now, I wonder if this is a key piece in it.
I would bet you're right. I mean, I know it is in the teacher training model in general. Yeah. You know, just outside of Yin. There's so many studios that would not have the roof paid for if they didn't run teacher trainings. I have some good ideas about that if anyone's interested on ways around that. But I wonder though, like, I just think, okay, so I had somebody, I think I only said this to you off air. I had somebody reach out in my DMs on Facebook, and she said that she really loves Yin and she wants to start training teachers in Yin. How would I recommend that she start? And, you know, as much as I was like, okay, that's confusing, I was like, well, you know, I mean, it is smart to reach out to somebody who is your senior and as a mentor to guide you, because I could give her lots of things not to do, mistakes I made, you know. But before I answered, I just clicked through on her profile and I noticed that in the American Yoga Alliance speak, she was a 200-hour teacher. Right. Not an experienced 200-hour teacher, not a 500-hour teacher, and not an experienced 500-hour teacher. Now, I don't know Yoga Alliance's current guidelines because I'm not a fan of Yoga Alliance. There's episodes about that if anyone wants to listen to them. But I will say that I do know that at some point, I think you had to be an experienced 500-hour teacher in order to run a teacher training.
Yeah, that's still true. Yeah.
Okay. So I replied with, first of all, you'd want to get 500 hours. And I would recommend, if you're leaning towards Yin, that you continue getting your hundreds of hours in Yin. If this is something you want to do, don't just go take another Hatha training, like find a good 300-hour Yin training or several. I said, so start there. And then also, do you have enough experience to be training teachers? I just think, when I'm just thinking about myself, I'm like, when did I go from being a teacher of yoga to a trainer of teachers to helping? And it wasn't until somebody asked me. Yeah. Like I was just obliviously doing my thing, massively studying with Paul, nerding out because I'm a nerd and I love to just take all the trainings I can afford to cram in, and just, you know, I have a voracious appetite for learning. And so I was just doing my thing. I was just doing that. And then somebody came to me and said, I'd like to learn more about Yin, blah, blah, blah. But I had been teaching for over 10 years at that point. It was definitely, if I was playing Yoga Alliance's game, I would have been like an E500 by then. And that's when I started apprenticing. I didn't even create a program yet. I just started doing it one-on-one. And so I responded with all of that. And I said, first study. If you think you want to offer yin yoga teacher trainings, first study, 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 study. Find a teacher who is qualified, who has either studied with, Paul or Sarah, perhaps, for many, many hours. If you can't study directly with Paul, you can't study directly with Paul anymore unless you've already been studying with Paul. He only is offering things for his teachers. Okay, so that's off the table. I think Sarah is still running programs though. If you can't fly around the world to go study with Sarah, because not everyone has that budget, can you at least look at I'm probably not using this word, but pedigree of the person that you're considering. So another one that drives me bananas, and I see it all the time in the Yin network, is, hey, I want to take a Yin training in Bali in these dates. Who can recommend one? And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? I mean, if you're doing that just because I want to go on vacation in this way, I can write it off. Okay. But if you're doing it because you actually want to start teaching Yin yoga classes, then
this is where you see it's the question around ticking a box, you see. And I think this is actually what advice could be offered to people who are considering a Yin training. And I've never stopped saying this, and I feel like a broken record sometimes because I'm constantly encouraging people to look at people's backgrounds, to
vet them,
look at their websites, look at who they've trained with. If it does not state clearly who they've trained with, send them an email and ask them, develop a conversation. Don't just trust Yin training. Yin in the name means nothing.
It means nothing. Yeah. And I would say, if you're listening to this right now, dear teachers, and you do train teachers in Yin, and you do have pedigree, let's just say, then why the hell isn't that on your website?
I know.
Mine is. I got a whole certification and training page. You can snoop around all you want on there. I was just thinking, I was like, oh, when did I update that last? But anyways, yes, vet your teachers well. Look at their training. Look at who they've studied with. Look at their testimonials page, or their praise page, or whatever it is. If they don't have a page with feedback from prior participants, and they don't have like a training and certification page, run. Run, don't walk.
Clear curriculum, even in terms of just have they identified what they're covering, learning outcomes, and is there practice? How much practice of Yin, how much Yin practice are you going to actually experience over the course of
I don't have that in mind. I should add that.
Well,
I have my syllabus, but I never put, actually, for each time we meet, you will also be doing 90 minutes of Yin. I did not.
Right. I mean, I don't think I stated that clearly either, but it's something that I often wonder, like, because I've heard of, the reason I'm saying that is because I know people who did a Yin training and there was no practice.
What?
I honestly, I could write
the horrors persist.
So all of these things that I'm saying to write are because you've
experienced them.
I've experienced examples of their complete absence. And really, this is where the education piece comes in, because if you're not running a training space where questions are welcome, then you're not running a teacher training. That's dictatorship. Like that is an absolutely not a safe learning environment, So I think we really need to encourage questions, because the yoga world by and large does not. And so I guess this is the radical piece, actually, that when you encourage students to question, you don't just enhance their critical thinking, their intellect, their discernment, but you actually start to put some ripples out into the yoga industry as a whole, which has been ridiculously overrun by guru worship for far too long. So I think that's a big piece of it as well, that those contributions ripple out.
That's a good aspect, like you said, when you're teaching them how to think critically and to ask questions. That is what's going to help them when they're done your training and they're sitting at the front of the room and something comes up that they aren't prepared for, is that ability to sit and critically think. because no matter how amazing our trainings are, we're all not going to have every single thing we could possibly ever have in a training. I mean, that would be a lifetime of study. For example, I had a woman that would come to my yin classes who had a chronic lung condition. And so she was constantly coughing stuff up. This is pre-COVID. During COVID, I'm sure she didn't leave her house. And so she would come to my class, and yin is a lot of lying around, and that would cause her to cough. And then other people in the room would kind of stare daggers at her because they would assume she was sick and she was spreading her germs. And so there, as a teacher, like, nobody prepared me for that situation. So I told her, I'm really grateful you're here, but actually, like, a hatha class would probably be better for you because you're not laying around as much. You're standing and then you're seated. And she said, yeah, I know, but I really need this class nervous system wise and blah, blah, blah. So what is a teacher to do? I mean, nobody prepared me for that. So but because I have the critical thinking skills, I knew I could figure something out. And so I just paused. And for the rest of that class, I was just like, And what we ended up doing was we made the wall her floor. So anything she would do lying down, I would find a way that she could do it leaning against a wall. So, and it was easy to do, actually. Once I was like, okay, that wall is her floor. How can I orientate her in a way that she doesn't have to lay down flat? And so she's not coughing. And then she doesn't feel terrible as everyone stares daggers at her and everyone else doesn't think she's spreading germs. And so I was like, I just moved her to the wall. If I was not confident enough in my teaching ability and also humble enough to not expect to have all the answers and didn't have the critical thinking to be able to analyze the situation and look at it and go, okay, I can figure everything out if I just break it apart for a few minutes. And not only did that really help her in my class, but then she started going to the yoga therapy college for classes that I studied at. And she ran into me on the street and told me how all of the teachers there were so impressed with her wall practice. They were like, oh, I've never seen anyone do that at the wall. I've never thought of anybody doing that. And then she said, I told them that you trained me to use the wall as my floor. And so my point is that if you can train your teachers to be critical thinkers, then anything you didn't prepare them for, they'll figure it out because they'll have the ability to ask the questions, to break it down, to pick it apart. Whereas if you don't encourage questions, then you end up with a bunch of, I don't know what it is to say, sheeps or parrots.
Yeah.
Which I don't know which one, but you end up with a bunch of people that are just doing what you did.
Yes.
Instead of doing their own thing. I still feel like, and I'm going to just say, if any of you listening to this are brave enough and you are a 50-hour trained teacher and you are offering a 50-hour or more teacher training, and you want to reach out, I would love to know the thought process there. I'm just very curious because it's easy for me to sit in the seat of judgment and be like, what the fuck are you thinking? Where is the humility? Where is the studentship? Where is the pedagogy? But I'm just curious, because I guess to me, I tend to be humble to a fault, maybe. Don't get me wrong. I can sit in the seat of the teacher and I know what I'm damn good at and what I'm trained in. But I'm also know that I'm always learning. And so I just can't imagine being a 50-hour in and then offering even a 50-hour, which did happen to me. I had somebody way back when I was studying with Paul, and I think I was 200 or 300 in, say in a Facebook group that they were considering running a training. And I just naively said in the comments, because I was also a yin nerd, oh my God, who did you study with? And she said that she had taken Bernie Clark's 50-hour and then wanted to offer a 50-hour. And I just remember my thought process being, you've taken a 50-hour from Bernie and that was just my logical was and also who else? And that was it. And I just remember thinking, I can't imagine being okay with just having a 50-hour and then because how are you doing that? Are you just regurgitating what that teacher taught you?
Yeah, I think, and to be honest with you, this is where AI is going to really have a very dangerous, impact, I think, in many ways on teacher training design, because I fully believe that people just Yeah, I know of a few people
It's
who would
plagiarism.
of totally plagiarism, but I don't even think they understand what that word means, to be honest with you. But like there are people who would have done an online 50-hour training with Bernie in COVID times and then basically just take that content and take away the first page and essentially plagiarize the entire thing, pass it off as their own. But I think what's happening more and more now is people using AI, and you can actually tell AI really loves those long dashes. So you can
Yes,
the
and
real
emojis. They
giveaway.
love AI loves emojis too.
Yeah. You can
Yeah.
really tell when somebody's written something when used AI to write it. And so I think now what would have been outsourced, because I know, I mean, I've written all of my manuals and curricula for all of my trainings and from
Yeah, me
scratch,
too.
painstakingly, and taken from so many different sources. And I think the beauty, I suppose, of going through the process is that you've such respect for that generative process, that creative process. The notion of putting anything into AI is just something that it just doesn't really pass even through my
No.
my thinking. But I know that's unusual enough, and an awful lot of people now are designing their teacher training curriculums through AI. And I can tell, launched a Myo Yin training some time ago, and literally about a few days later, somebody else in Ireland announced that they were going to run a Myo Yin training. And when you looked through on their website what they were offering, it's all written by AI. It's so obviously written
Oh,
by
geez.
this, and I actually know that this person in question doesn't necessarily even have any training in it. So this is what's happening now. You see that it doesn't. And look, you can are those people threats? Absolutely not. But they add confusion. That's my point all the time.
And
We're not talking about being threatened by competition, because they're clearly not competition. But what they are confusing, because they confuse
yes,
playing field to quite a large degree, that the consumer, the future client, has to pay so much more attention to their process of buying, right?
to be honest, and I'm going to use this word, even though it's a heavy word, to me, it feels predatory
Yeah. Well, and
because you've got these innocent teachers wanting to learn more, bumbling around, looking at websites, um, overwhelmed with the amount of options. And you're just totally content to take their money, even though if you look in your heart of hearts, you know you're not qualified.
yeah.
And yet you're doing it anyway. That to me, and I will say, as a teacher who also works with yoga teachers on their business, I have my business mentorship hat on, that I understand the need to make money in this industry. It's not freaking easy to do. There are very few people in this industry that are full-time yoga teachers and that are feeding themselves and having any money in the bank and wearing organic cotton leggings. Like this is not, this is not an easy thing to do. However, the answer to that problem is not, I should run a teacher training.
Correct. Yeah.
The answer to that problem is, I need to fucking learn how to market. And if you need some help, reach out.
Yeah, become a specialist and become damn good
Yes.
at fewer things, instead of doing a
Bravo.
20 or
Yes.
30-hour training in 15 different goddamn styles.
Yeah.
Like,
Or
go.
if do you even need to train teachers? Like, if you're a yoga teacher and you're not training teachers now, and you think that like just offering teacher training is the way that you're going to feed yourself, you're missing out on marketing yourself properly to your students. Like the reason you're not feeding yourself is because you don't have any business skill set when working with the public. That's just going to translate over to teachers. Like if you don't know how to, like you said, specialize or niche, I might use the word, and you don't know how to reach the people that you are ideally suited to serve in an ethical, easy way, then that's still going to be the case when you try to train teachers.
Of course.
It's not a band-aid solution. It's not a become sustainable in my business quick fix to start suddenly offering teacher trainings.
Yeah.
And that really, like, I'll be honest, like the whole reason that, like, when I first started getting asked to train teachers, I wasn't really that interested. I did actually shrink away from it a little bit, not because of any kind of imposter syndrome, but just because of like, I'm just busy doing my own thing over here. Like, that's like a whole new thing that I would have to add on. But the reason I did it is because I realized how poorly trained so many teachers are. And I would look at programs and trainings and get so frustrated with what they were offering that I thought, I can continue to complain about the problem, or I could be part of the solution.
Yeah, 100%.
And so that's why I work with teachers, because I believe that yoga can change the world. And I also know I can only reach so many students. But if I can help teachers become exceptional teachers, now they're reaching more people, and, there's that ripple effect, right? Yeah. So the only reason that I started working with teachers is because I saw how much struggle was out there. And I knew that I had what could help. So I would just say, like, for anyone, let's start to maybe kind of round this out a little bit. For anybody who is, I was shocked and horrified to listen to another podcast recently. And maybe I do live in my own bubble. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm just going to say, as much as I wish that I was 100% anti-AI, I'm not. I will often use AI to create show notes for the podcast, but I have to go back in and edit it. Like, it's creating an outline that then I have to go back in and make sound like Nick. And I may use them occasionally for a title if I've got a good episode, but I'm like, good title. I'll be like, give me 10 titles for this episode on this. And then I never take exactly what they've given me. I'll take like the beginning of this one with this one, or one of them will spark an idea in my head. And so using AI as a creative, like a tool when you're staring at the blank cursor page, and you're just like, beep, but nothing's coming, that's helpful to me. But I end up having to rework it and rewrite things and all of that.
There's a difference between using AI for things like that and using AI to create what you are not able to do yourself and then selling it to people as a training.
Yes. And I remember this podcast was talking about how many yoga teachers were using AI to create their sequences.
Oh, yeah.
And to write their meditations and their yoga nidra scripts. And call me naive, but fuck, really? The amount of time that I spent as a new teacher banging my head against the sequencing wall over and over, and the hours that I spent writing things out, practicing with my own body. Nope, put this here, move this there. The hours I spent watching videos and going, write that sequence down, try it. Ooh, that didn't work. Oh, I don't like this. I'm going to put this over. Like, I cannot tell you the amount of hours I spent to hone and craft sequencing. To think that the next generation is just putting in a sequence and AI is giving it to them, and that's what they're teaching. Like, I just think,
yeah,
that's a bad sign of the times as far as I'm concerned. And let alone, so if I'm horrified by the fact that some teachers are using it to create their sequence or their meditation script, to hear that people are using it for their teacher training manuals is like, that's like next level horror for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure which is worse, that people are using it or that they're getting away with it, because the people signing up can't tell. So
it's the wild, wild west out there.
It is pretty much the wild, wild west. Yeah. But I guess, encouraging people to take the time to ask some questions. Look, that's the way to have a positive influence, I think, on that.
Okay. I think that maybe what we should do as our roundup for this episode is, first, let's talk to the people who are looking for a training and what they should look for, what to look for. We've touched on it a little bit, but we can kind of maybe hone in on that a little. And then let's talk about the people that are tempted to or have already started offering trainings. And really, if they're sitting still and quiet with themselves in their heart of hearts, they know they're not qualified, or they want to start. And like, what would be those next steps? How's that sound?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's start with, okay, You have a crush on Yin Yoga. You want to start teaching Yin Yoga. You're out there looking for a training. It's the freaking wild, wild west out there. What do we want to look for? And what do we want to not look for? I'll let you start. What are the qualifiers for finding a good training and what to avoid?
Start with the length of the training. Go to the teacher's bio. Look at how long the teacher is practicing. Look at how the teacher maintains relationships with her teachers. Look at the way they can write and speak about the practice from an experiential place, like not just things they've heard their teachers say, but things that are very much words that are very
from
much
their own practice,
their body, from their own practice. Yeah. Look at the curriculum. Look at the degree that I suppose the variety of influence, I would say, or even just how well does this training, how complete is it, I suppose, in setting you up. Look at teaching practice, look at opportunities to get feedback on your teaching, and look at how much time you're actually going to spend experiencing yin in your body. I would say I covered a good bit there.
Okay, I will add and pick apart. Look at who they've trained with. We've said that. Yes, 100%. And how many hours with said teacher or teachers.
Yeah.
Okay. Testimonials. Do they have a testimonials page, a praise page, something where you can see from other people who have taken the course what the feedback is? If they don't have that, either of those things on their website, some people are generous and would say email them. I would say walk away. Just leave. Bye. Next website. Because if they don't have them, that might be why they're not there, or they're just not savvy enough to know that it's important to have these things on their website. Like either way, that feels dodgy to me. So if they don't have their training listed with their teachers, how many hours, et cetera, and praise, just next. The syllabus. Yes. What are you covering? I never thought to put how many hours of asana study. So I will add that to mine. Thank you for that, my friend. Because we do 90 minutes every single time. So I can easily do the math on that. How long is the training? I would say at absolute bare minimum to I want to maybe sub the occasional yin class, like little toe dip in the water would be a 50-hour, like minimum standard. And then if you love that, you need to keep studying from there. So I would say anything shorter than 50 hours, walk away.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is choosing your yin training based on location. I want to go to Bali and I want to take a yin training. Who can recommend one? No. Go to Bali. Yes. Have a retreat. Write it off on your taxes because you're a yoga teacher. Please spoil yourself. Indulge. Do all of that. But that is not how we choose a training. I mean, call me old school, Gen X. So yeah, I am old school. But when we started studying with teachers, we were finding the teacher based on their reputation. And then we were going to them.
Exactly. Wherever they would be, you would go. Absolutely. You'd follow 100%. That's what I always...
It would be like, okay, they only train in this area and maybe I don't have the funds for that, but now I know, and I'm going to start saving my pennies. And now there are trainings online that can be done well too, if the teacher's smart about it. And I have an online training. People no longer have to come to me, but still you choose your training based on the teacher and their reputation, not based on the location and whether or not they have a payment plan and the length of the training. Like when you said that girl saying, why would I take 100-hour when there's a 50? I was just like, why wouldn't you want more expertise? This does not compute to me.
Looking to tick a box, you see.
Yeah. So I would say all of those things, look at their website. What was their training? Do they have their pedigree listed? Do they have testimonials? Do they clearly label what you're going to learn? I even have on mine, this training is not for you. So a lot of people don't know this, but I have my main training page, my sales letter page. And then when people click sign up, I have a, are you sure page. because there's a lot of words on the first one, to make sure that like, okay, you need to understand these following things. You have to attend 60% live. You must complete the homework assignments if you want a certificate. Like, this is an actual training. This isn't a like, I'm going to watch some videos while I eat chips in my pajamas and get a certificate. Now, I will say we don't actually offer in my training practice teaching or me watching them teach and giving feedback, because that's something I offer afterwards in mentorship. But I also clearly state that right there on there. It's like, this training does not include. Sometimes my trainees will team up and share Zoom links and practice teaching on each other, and I don't have to organize it, and that's fine. But typically what happens is after someone's done my program, then we dive into mentorship, and that's where they get what you just mentioned, where it's like, I'm going to get you to record your class, and I'm going to, give you feedback, and you're going to shadow me when I'm teaching and all of that stuff. So that's how I handle that. But yeah, so I would say that's a good start.
Yeah. And the next question then was about people who wanted to run a training.
Either the people who have maybe been listening to this and they did do what we just said, where they did just take a 50-hour and now they're teaching a 50 or 100. So either that person or someone who's like, I really want to offer a yin training.
Yeah. Why? Is a great part. I would get a page out and I would write down every single reason why. Yeah. And if you're already doing it, the same question applies. Why?
Agree. Why? Yeah.
Why? So that's,
because everything starts with why.
Everything starts with why, you'd hope. So I think that's a good place, I think, to start. And then the next page is how. And how is like, how are your skills suited to this? How are you as a full package able to do this work? How are you best suited? So how are all your skills, your experience, your education, your degree, your master's, potentially your experience elsewhere, how do they support you in this venture? Those two are great. And then I think maybe you could have some questions or some gentle inquiry. I think the value of a mentor, the value of just having someone who will mirror back your process to you. If it's just, you don't just wake up one day and go, I like yin. I've done a couple of yin classes. I did this training. I think I'm going to run a training now because we live in a world where we can do what we want to do. And it's this, I actually wish those people could just be given a dose of imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm. Don't you find that the yoga world in general, I would say I'm going to do percentages and math is not my skill set. Let's say 40% of people have imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And then 40% could use some imposter syndrome for a good dose of humility. And then it's the little leftover sliver of people that are actually staying within their lane, within their scope of practice, working on honing their skills, being humble enough to say, I don't know when they don't know, a lot
of education. I don't know.
Yeah. I love that you started with why, because if the answer to why is money, wrong answer.
Yeah.
It's not, it can't be the answer, because what's going to happen is you're going to offer mediocre trainings that you're probably not qualified to lead.
Yeah.
That money was the last thing I considered when I started working with teachers. In fact, I don't even know if I charged the first person who apprenticed with me. I was just like, okay, you want to, sure. I don't know how this is going to work, but come along. We'll figure it out together. Let's get on the path together, So money should not be the answer. And if you are running your trainings just to make money, again, I'm going to say this with love to your yoga teacher. Your problem isn't that you're not offering a teacher training. Your problem is that you don't know how to market yourself. So if you're not making enough with what you're already doing, that's where you want to focus your time, attention, and energy on figuring out how to run your business. Don't just start throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that if I just offer a myofascial training, then that'll make me money. And if I just do, stop the madness. Learn first how to market your business. I can help you. If you need help, just reach out. Learn that part first, because otherwise everything you add on is going to be just the same. So I would say the why is key. As I mentioned, I was a reluctant teacher training. The only reason I did this is because two parts. One, people reached out and asked me to. And two, because I could see the horrors that were happening out there. And I just thought, oh my God, like, really? Is this all there is? To quote a song, is this all there is? And that's why I stepped into that role rather reluctantly, but here we are. And now I can't imagine life without it. So the why is key, because if you're just doing it for money, it's not good enough. Just not. We need to, as yoga professionals who are unregulated, we need to hold the bar high for ourselves as professionals. So that I agree, the why. And the how, that was good. I like that. Yeah. Like, how are you even going to write a manual? I didn't know. I had no idea. I just sat down and was like, okay, shall we start at the beginning? Like I was telling a story. Let's start at the beginning. What do they need to know first? And then, and I, as much as I don't agree with it, and I think it's, again, another horror that you just educated me on, that people are using AI to write their manuals, because that would have saved me time. Wow. But the amount of blood, sweat, and tears and editing and re-editing and on and on and on and on that went into writing a manual, like that in itself is work that, as a teacher, if you're listening and you want to start training, you don't even realize how much work that is, unless you're going to cheat and use AI, which I do not recommend. And by the way, you're not getting paid for that work. No. FYI, you just spend hours and hours and hours and hours typing at your computer before you even have the manual for the course that you now need to fill. So the how also, I would just say, if you're feeling drawn to teach teachers in any vein, whether it's yin or restorative or whatever your specialty is, ask yourself honestly, am I qualified to do this? Like, that's where that 20% of not imposter syndrome, but not hubris comes in. Like, am I truly qualified to do this? And if not, but it is something I really want to do, now you know your path. Now you gain that experience and those qualifications as a teacher before you try to train teachers. Because there are, I would say that the stuff in my manual, of course, we go over that in my course, but 90% of the ahas that people get in my program are for them asking questions and for statements that I've made, all the little things that can't be easily put into a manual. And in order to have those, you need to have the experience as a teacher to be able to offer that. So if you're a new teacher, I hate to say it, but sit down, child.
Yeah.
Just wait. Now's not the time.
10 years.
Study. Yeah. Find a mentor.
10,000 hours, they say. 10,000 hours to master something. So I really feel like,
it's a good number.
There needs to be a huge amount of time.
Study. Find a mentor. Have the humility to train.
Okay. Yeah. We got it all.
Yeah. I think we got it all. Of course, as soon as we log off, we'll be like, we should have said this, but then that's just a reason to bring you back. I would love to. I think we should probably wrap it up now. So first, is there anything I forgot to ask you about that is kind of percolating that you feel like we should share?
Oh gosh, so many. No, I get a good question in the moment. That's when I think I riff best. But no, I can't think right now of anything in particular.
Okay. And then tell me, please use this opportunity as a shameless plug for your programs. And let me know, first of all, what are you offering and where people can find you?
So you can find me at gracetempany.com, and you can find my training. So my signature program, I guess, is the Art of Yin 100-hour training, which opens the pathway to 2 300-hour programs. So the first is Functional Yoga Integrated, and the second is Soma Talk Body Psychotherapy Program. And so all of the information is there on the website, but yeah, I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and I teach both all around Ireland and online and in Europe and in Bali. Funnily enough, we mentioned Bali.
Well, that's good to know. Next time someone in the group says, I need a training in Bali, I'm just going to tag you and go, hey, Grace.
I fair not to attract people who just want to come to Bali.
Right?
Fair enough. And look, I'm on a break from Instagram at the minute, but you can often find me there at Grace Tempany, talking about all things yin and encouraging critical thinking and discernment amongst the social media population, much to my heart's miscontent sometimes when I realize my efforts are mostly in vain.
Yes. Yeah, no kidding.
But
I would say what Grace probably isn't going to say. I'm guessing you have an email list.
I do.
Okay, so my friends, rather than trying to find her on Instagram, what you need to do is you need to get on her website and you need to get on her email list. Even if maybe you're not looking at training in the next 6 months or whatever, get on the list. That's what I always say to people. I'm like, don't count on seeing that I have a training coming up on Instagram, because Instagram shows your followers 1 to 2% of your stuff. Get on the email list. So if you, especially those of you that are in the UK and area, I have several students in my online training that are in the UK, and that times it's not too bad for them. But I mean, I have people from all around the world, and sometimes I'm like, someone else's time zone might work better for you.
Yeah, absolutely. The time zone, the UK and Ireland would work well, and for the autumn cohort.
Yeah, because it's not far, even if you were in person and someone wanted to come and travel. Yep. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks, Vic. Pleasure.
I think it's so wonderful that you can just be chatting in the DMs with a colleague and kind of both talking about stuff that's on your mind, and then just be like, hey, why don't we record this and make it a little fireside chat? Absolutely. So those of you listening, I hope that you got something out of this, some food for thought. And again, remember, like, neither of us are sharing this because we're like, oh, come to my training. It's just, it's so
fair about the industry, really. It's out of concern for industry standards, at least speaking.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to witness. It's genuine heartbreak to witness.
It's the utter disrespect, that not just for the practice itself and the sacredness of the practice itself and the integrity of it, but the efforts of those who truly devote their life's work to its cultivation and to its integral sharing. It's a real slap in the face, actually, to operate in that way. So yeah. So we came to you with broken hearts about this. That's why we're doing it, because it's horrible, like Grace said, to pour your heart, soul, dollars, time, passion into something that you truly revere, love, respect, and honor, and want to offer to people in the absolute best way you can. And then to see these horrors persist and go, whoa, what's happening? Why are they doing this to the yoga? Yeah. All right. For those of you listening, Grace and I will say our proper goodbyes when I hit stop record. But for those of you that have been listening, thank you for hanging out with us, and bye for now.